if you guys have watched the previous two videos, you know exactly where this is going, but I've been spending the past few weeks working on this rear roof structure, working on the rear inner quarter panels, this rear lower window channel. Everything was completely rusted, rotted out, so it's been a lot of work to get to this point here. But in this video, we're gonna go ahead, finally complete this project, tie it all together with these pieces right here. Been trying my best to plan ahead and think things through before going ahead and making them, and that's why it took a little while to complete this whole project here, but I think I got a plan that'll work, and it should all come together here pretty easily. These pieces right here are gonna go together basically on a 90, so this will sit on top of this piece here. I had a local metal shop laser cut these out to the dimensions I measured for. That way I got perfect 90s on the end. These are perfectly straight across. There's no issues with that, and it was pretty affordable, so happy with how that came to be. I had a couple of people asking about what metal thickness this was I was using for everything. I measured the factory rear roof structure to be 18 gauge, so that's what I've been making everything out of here. Those new inner quarter pieces, along with these corner extensions for the roof structure, there's all 18 gauge as well. So should tie together pretty nicely here. It took me a little bit to decide on exactly how I wanted to do this, because as you can see, this piece has a bend that comes in here, and I was going to make a piece that just followed that bend, and then I had a flat piece that went all the way across here. The only issue I saw with that is this is basically going to be the start or the top of my rear firewall, because back here be a fuel cell. I didn't want to have this bend going all the way down to the chassis or the floor pan, wherever it's going to end up right here. So to simplify things, I decided we'll have a straight piece come all the way across right here, which will then leave me this gap, which is about, I don't know, 3/4 to an inch gap right there. And that's where this little strip of metal comes in. I got this top piece here trimmed to what I need for the corners there. So you can see like I had to cut a decent amount off those sections just to make sure that this radius here matches up with this radius. You can see I got a little bit of a gap there. That's because this piece on the bottom isn't totally flat. So I have to go through, hammer and dolly the bottom of this window channel piece here, then that'll butt up against there perfectly. I got this back piece just kind of taped to that just to see how it's gonna work with that 90 bend there. The tricky part is gonna be going through and getting this radius on this piece, which is about 1 7/8 inches here, to match up with the radius of the roof structure. So that's gonna be a little bit tricky, but now that I got my line for that, and line for that on this side here, I think I'm gonna go through and start on the dimple dies right now. That way the dimple dies will add some structure to this piece, so when I go to do the radiused corners on it, it doesn't warp the rest of it, or same thing when I go to weld this bigger piece to that little top channel. So that's my thinking behind that there. It should work out pretty decent as long as I do this right, but I got my point there because that's where the line is gonna start, right on that crease to that crease over there. So now I just got to go through measure center, or if I'm going to split the difference on the center for the dimples, or exactly what I'm going to do, we'll go ahead and figure that out. So to get a dimple die in the metal, there's a couple different things you can go with. You could send the metal out to a company, they'll put a dimple in it, or you can get the dies themselves, and with a press, you could sandwich the metal down, puts a little flare in it, or you can go with this option here, which is a little costly, but it gives you the ability to basically walk around at any point in the car. And if there's a piece that's already on the car, say I want to put a dimple there, that's part of the car, I could do it with this right here. For those that have never seen one of these or not totally sure how they work, it's basically a punch and a flare. So you drill a pilot hole, which is about 1/2 inch for this bolt right here in the metal. Then the metal gets sandwiched between this piece and the top piece right here. You tighten it together. These basically teeth on this are going to cut through the metal, punch the hole, and then as you can see right here, this part is the actual flare part. So it kind of radiuses it down in this lip, and then this is the end result right here. So it's super clean, it's pretty efficient. Like I said, the only downside to this method is these tools are a little bit costly and you got to buy a different one for each size, obviously. Went through the other day, made a bunch of templates, was mocking up on my cardboard template to see which size dimple I wanted to go with. Ended up going with a 2.5 inch dimple, which will work out pretty good because I was debating between 2.5 and actually 2 5/8, just because that is a pretty big piece under there. Well, it turns out with this style tool here, when you actually punch the hole and it flares it, it actually makes it an 1/8 inch bigger. So this is technically a 2 5/8 hole with that flare on there. So that'll work out pretty perfectly there. Gonna go ahead on my piece, measure out exactly where I want these to go, and then start punching the holes in them. Got this piece all measured here, figured out where the centers of all these dimples are gonna go. I went ahead and drew them on here as well just to get a good visual to make sure I was okay with the spacing and everything. So pretty happy with that. With the outer radius of the kind of flare there, it ended up being 3 inches exactly. So we got a 3-inch circle there just to mimic what it's gonna look like. And then I went through and put a 3-inch gap on each of them as well. So I think that looks pretty good. There's a 2 1/4 gap on the ends here. So I could have spaced them out a little bit more, but I wanted to leave some more room on the end just because of that radius that's gonna have to go in there. So I didn't want to push it right to the edge and then there'd be a radius right on the end, just because I thought that would have looked a little goofy. So hopefully this way it'll look a little more natural. That's all measured out. Time to start punching holes. Obviously this piece here is about double the length of my little sheet metal brake here, so I was not going to be able to put this 90 on the end here. This is my genius, not so genius solution to hopefully getting this to weld on pretty good without warping. I got a sheet of aluminum here, that's a 90, it's about an 1/8 inch thick. I was hoping I could find something out of copper, but shocker, they don't make any square stock or 90 channel in copper, so aluminum was my next best bet. I got these pieces clamped on the edge. They're not quite overlapping. It's basically just a 90 joint there with this little groove, so when I weld it, it'll weld nice and seamlessly in there. First, I'll go through and the spots that have the clamps on them, that have the most pressure, I'll go through, weld those, and then I'll start moving along, giving it plenty of cool time, because as you can see, like this here is a little bit warped just from putting all these dimples in it. Not surprised, so this is gonna take some time. I'm thinking it should turn out pretty good. I think it'll work a lot better than just trying to have everything up on the car and trying to weld it, because that piece is so big it could warp super easily. So I don't know, go slow, take my time, be careful, cool it down, give it plenty of cool down time, and we'll see how it turns out here. I feel like rarely do I have an idea that actually works first try without me having to go back and redo something or redo work. But my idea with these clamps and with this aluminum angle iron to get a perfect 90 on this thing actually worked. I'm pretty stoked about that. The aluminum here ended up absorbing most of the heat, going through the steel. So I think that actually worked out. I didn't really think about that beforehand, but that worked out pretty good. I just went slow, did a couple pieces, you know, quenched it with some water, let it cool down, did a couple more tacks here and there, went slowly, but dude, that looks pretty freaking sweet. I just went through, ground down the welds, hit with the DA really quick. It's only 60 grit, so it's not totally finished, but man, that looks pretty dang good thus far. So I'm happy with that. It's kind of hard to see it exactly on there just because I got all these different angles on the end. Whoa, camera's flipping out. But yeah, that is pretty sweet. That is sturdy. Doing that after I put the dimples in was definitely the move, because now this is a pretty solid piece. There is some warpage in the bottom here still from the dimples, but at least from about, you know, bottom of the circles up, at least this line up, it is perfectly flat. So maybe take the hammer and dolly to this or figure something else out. But it's looking pretty good right now. So let's go ahead and mock this thing up in the car now. Got the back piece here fully welded in. Took some time to get those corners and the side pieces dialed in. Took some work with the hammer and dolly like per usual, but overall pretty happy with how smooth that turned out. Blends in with these corner pieces nice, blends in with these corners pretty nice. So it's not 100% done because I haven't ground on the welds on the inside for any of these pieces or metal finished that yet. But the back side of it is all complete, so I can start putting on the rear panels and not have to worry about that. I will metal finish the inside once I start cutting out the package tray to build my own there. Last step for this piece will be to weld up these plug welds that I drilled on the inside there. Obviously grind those down, make them look smooth, and that'll get rid of this gap, which you can kind of see is wavy in between there. Other than that, pretty happy with how this turned out. You can see it's level this way, got the laser level on it with the center line. It's level across the bottom there. So took my time to get that dialed in, and not only is that going to be a structural piece, it looks good, and that is a good base to build kind of these rest of the rear panels off of. Okay, so this back piece is done. The rear window channel is done. Those interior pieces are done, which means the last part of this kind of rear section of the car is going to be capping off the end of this roof structure piece here. So I got to go through and cut off this brace slash jig that I made for both these sides here. But if I go ahead and do that, that leaves some wiggle room on the car. So I got these sticks of 1x1. I like using this to brace things up. I think it'll work out pretty well here. My plan is to basically just do a giant X. So go from solid point up there down to that side of the chassis table. We'll do the same thing going this way. We'll see how that is. That should be pretty sturdy. If not, I got one more piece that may go across, or if I have to do some little supports, we'll do that. But I want to get all these welded in place, take some measurements, cut these off. Everything should stay in position, but if something moves a little bit, at least I'll have those measurements because I know these are correct here. So do that, can cap off those corners. Gotta make 2 more little braces after that for these interior panels. And then we can start putting these quarters on and be rocking and rolling. laser level here is probably one of the best investments. It's not cheap, but I'd say it's well worth it. Been using it a lot lately and plan on using it a ton going forward. So got the old bracing cut off this end of the roof structure piece here. Got my line kind of drawn on. You can see where that's at right there. We'll go ahead, flush cut this. Still need to finish smoothing this out, but just wanted to ground on the welds just to get them out of the way for now. Cut this. Pretty much gonna go from this corner here. It'll be nice, level, flat all the way across. Cap it off there. I am going to put a hole in the center of the plate, or maybe 2 or 3. I haven't totally decided what yet, but there's gonna be a breathing hole basically on that, because the last thing I want is for moisture to get trapped in here somehow, right? And just pile up at the bottom and just completely rust this corner out. This is pretty nice as is, and after doing all this work, last thing I need is for this car to start rusting again. Okay, I got both these pieces wrapped up now. I know I said I wasn't gonna do dimple in them, but I ended up having enough space, just barely, but I wanted to add it, like I said, for structure in these pieces. Although this is a little bit thicker of metal, so looks pretty good. Got that all welded up, turned out nice and smooth. These holes are a little bit bigger than I wanted for the plug welds on there, but I broke 2 drill bits trying to get that on there because this drill is kind of trash, and that was the only size left I had that'll work. So it'll definitely be welded on pretty strong now. These are gonna go on here just like so. I gotta do some final trimming and prep on this piece to get these welded on, but it'll be pretty simple. Weld that all the way across, do the plug welds on the bottom there. I already threw some rust converter up in there, so that is all good. Got that all the way around. I got some weld through primer on this piece. Do some weld through primer on the back side. Coat this piece, at least the piece that's gonna be covered up in here as well. And then once it's all fully welded on, I'll be able to spray some coating down through here and on the inside as well and get this thing fully sealed up. Been working on this side here over the past few nights, getting this wire wheeling down, just trying to get this to as much bare metal as possible. It's looking pretty good. Hit it with the big wire wheel first there, go back with the little drill, get it knocked down. So pretty happy with how it's turning out. I got this plate all welded on as well, if that'll focus there. This was one of the trickiest things to weld on here, mainly because obviously you got this older, thinner metal. As much as I cleaned it, it's still a little pitted. And then you got this new metal. So you can see it was pretty good in the center there. I had to add this piece, or the little weld on top of the bead there at the end because it burned through a little. So not totally stoked on that, but it's welded on and it's going to be all obviously capped off once it's all said and done. It's gonna go through, kind of finish cleaning this up, and then once that is done, go through and spray some rust converter on that section that needs to get some rust converter on it. Then probably throw some primer on the rest of this bare metal section back here, toss some paint on it, and be looking pretty solid. So been a lot of work, a lot of different stages to get to this point, but come to this side here, you can see this panel turned out pretty good. So I got as much rust converter as I could spray up in the top there, and you can definitely see it coming through in this section right here. So pretty happy with that. Once the body is done and the chassis is done and everything is, you know, all complete before the car gets body worked and painted, I've been debating if I want to blast the entire thing just to bring it down back to bare metal. Once again, the reason that I'm tossing, you know, coat of paint on top of pretty much everything that I'm doing, you can see the rockers are painted, everything up front has been painted, now everything, you know, back here just has a coat of paint on it is because once springtime hits, or if the weather drastically changes, all that is just gonna flash rust. I dealt with it all last spring, so I just decided just toss a coat of paint on top of everything to prevent that. I would much rather everything still be in bare metal, but it is what it is. So I know when you go to paint a car, obviously you don't want to paint over rattle can paint, so that's what I'm saying. I think I might blast everything, or obviously during the body work phase that'll all get sanded off just to protect the bare metal for right now. Obviously this section right here is going to get covered up by the quarter panel, so with that rust converter on there, that's why I wanted to make sure that is good and that has a nice top coat of paint on it, because that'll protect that area plentiful. And speaking of this quarter panel here, that is going to be the next step. Obviously this is all wrapped up from the back side here, all these little brackets, all these little pieces. I'm glad it's all tied together now. It was a ton of work just to make all that happen, so consider that project accomplished now. And in the next video, we're gonna go ahead and start tossing these pieces on for good.